Hi friends, my name is Katya. This is Kat Reads a Lot. Welcome or welcome back to my channel. Today's video is going to be a bunch of reviews of books that I've read relatively recently. It'll be reviews for June, May, and April because it has been so long since I've filmed a wrap up. So settle in, get yourself a snack or a beverage. I myself am drinking some iced coffee. You can see my lipstick stain on the straw. But today, as always, I'm going to be reviewing these books in the form of pro-con lists, which has become my favorite way to review books just because it really helps me to remember to list all of the good things and the bad things about different books, because no matter how much I really love a book, there are always negatives, and no matter how much I really hate a book, there are always positives. So with that, let's get right on into it. First book I'm going to talk about is Ready or Not by Cara Bastone. This book follows our main character Eve, who after an uncharacteristic one-night stand ends up becoming pregnant. She does decide to keep the baby, and the rest of the book is all about her journey through her pregnancy and about her relationships. Now, the three biggest relationships that we follow throughout the book are between Eve and her best friend's brother Shep, who is very supportive of her throughout her pregnancy, between Eve and her best friend Willa, who has been trying to have a baby and has been dealing with infertility, and then between Eve and the baby's father. As far as positives of this book, I really liked the way that it handled the different character relationships. I thought that all of the conflict seemed really believable and realistic, which I appreciated. It's set in New York City, and I really liked how descriptive the book was of the different seasons as we moved through the year. Now, for negatives, I think that Eve as a character was sometimes like too quirky. There was a certain kind of humor in this book that just didn't click with me, unfortunately. I found myself kind of like cringing at certain jokes that Eve would try to make, and that's just a personal humor preference, but definitely something to be aware of if you're sensitive to overly quirky heroines. And then also towards the end of the book, when Eve gives birth to her baby, there is a very long descriptive scene of Eve giving birth. And I know that people talk all the time about how painful and unpleasant giving birth is, and so like I know, but I had never read from the perspective of somebody talking about themselves like blacking out from the pain and just how miserable it was. It really did freak me out as someone who would like to have kids one day. Not anytime soon, but still, I absolutely understand why it was in the book, but I didn't enjoy it. So that's Ready or Not. Let's talk about another romance right away. I have Just for the Summer by Abby Jimenez. This is the third book in her Connected Standalones series, which started with Part of Your World. And this has kind of an outlandish premise, but it's very fun. We follow our two main characters, Justin and Emma, and they meet on Reddit because they both are cursed. They both have this thing where whoever they date after they break up with them, they end up meeting the love of their life, the person that they marry. So both Justin and Emma have watched all of their exes, or even people that they just date casually, like immediately go on and get married after breaking up with them. And so they decide that if they want to break this curse, that they should date each other, because then their curses will cancel each other out, and then they each, after having dated the other, will meet their soulmate after, or that's the theory. This book was really cute. I really liked the dynamic and the banter between Justin and Emma, and I loved the side characters, especially Emma's best friend and roommate Maddie. As the title may suggest, it's a very summery book set on a lake in Minnesota, so I really loved the Midwestern summer vibes. I was actually really surprised by some of the connections that this book had, both to Part of Your World and to yours truly, but in particular to characters in Part of Your World. There were some people who came back who I did not in a million years expect to come back, and so that made, again, for a surprising and rewarding reading experience. So I would definitely recommend, if you're thinking of reading this book, to read Part of Your World first. I also really appreciated how candidly Abby Jimenez discusses mental health and trauma and attachment styles. But my biggest con about this book was the fact that the big conflict is really mostly solved with a time jump. We have this issue that's brought up, there's a period of time that passes, and then everything is okay again. It would have been a difficult thing to solve on page, so I understand why the time jump happened, but that doesn't mean that I liked it very much. But overall, that's a relatively small critique, so I did give this 4.5 stars. Now for the one nonfiction that I read, this is The Age of Magical Overthinking by Amanda Montell. I was really excited to read this because I loved Word Slut by Amanda Montell, which is all about feminism and linguistics, and this book is all about magical thinking. In The Age of Magical Overthinking, Montell argues that in the modern information age, our brain's coping mechanisms systems have been overloaded, irrationality is dialed up to an 11. So the book covers things like manifestation, nostalgia, the halo effect of celebrities, and sunk cost fallacy. I thought this was a really interesting, engaging book. It was a fast thing to read. I listened to the audiobook, which I thought was done really well. I like Amanda Montell's writing style. It's conversational and accessible. As far as negatives for this book, it did feel a little bit more like musings and very light research, as opposed to some of her previous books that I had read that really felt like Montell was an expert in what she was talking about. So for example, in Word Slut, that book is all about linguistics and the way that language has been kind of shaped by the patriarchy and how language relates to feminism, and it was just really fascinating. And since Montell is a linguist, I feel like you could really tell on the page that she really knew what she was talking about. But in this book, although I don't know that much about the author, it just didn't feel like she was speaking as much from a place of expertise as she was just a place of general interest. And so although it was interesting, it didn't necessarily have the depth that I usually prefer to have in a nonfiction book. Next is My Sister's Keeper. This book follows our main character, Anna, and she has been a donor for her sister Kate ever since she was born. Kate has had cancer, I think, since she was 3, and so their parents kind of engineered Anna to be born to be a perfect match for Kate in terms of blood and organs, so that she could donate things to Kate so that Kate would not die. Now the conflict in this book arises when Anna turns 13 and decides to sue her parents so that she can be medically emancipated and make her own decisions about her body and basically stop giving organs to Kate, namely a kidney that she is supposed to give to Kate to save her life. One of my favorite things about this book is that there are many POVs and they all are so distinct from one another. I find that sometimes when a book has too many points of view, they can become a little bit muddy and some voices can start to sound like each other, but that was not the case with this at all. They were all very distinct, and I really liked all the characters. I liked spending time with them even though they were grappling with a very difficult situation. Given the difficult situation, it's also very thought-provoking. It raises a lot of interesting issues, and it is high drama. There are some great twists in this book. That being said, it's a pretty controversial ending. I buddy read this with my friend Chloe, and I remember her saying that she was bothered by the ending because she felt like the author kind of shies away from answering a lot of the big questions that are raised throughout the book. I didn't necessarily see it that way, but I could absolutely understand how someone would, so that is probably one of the negatives as well. Listen for the Lie is a mystery thriller following our main character Lucy, who returns to her hometown after a podcaster decides to make a true crime podcast about a murder that occurred in her hometown 5 years ago. This is an unsolved murder, and the person who died was Lucy's best friend, and although she was never arrested or convicted, everybody in the small town thinks that Lucy did it because on the night that the friend died, Lucy showed up like covered in blood with no memory of the night before. This is another book with lots of drama. I really loved Lucy as a narrator. I thought that she was really compelling and sarcastic and funny and just an entertaining character to follow through the story. My cons were that it was a very straightforward mystery. There weren't a lot of twists and turns, which I usually prefer when I'm reading a mystery thriller. And then I also wanted people to have like stronger motives. Not very many people had, I thought, believable motives for being suspects, but anyway, that is Listen for the Lie. Patricia Wants to Cuddle is a horror rom-com, or at least that's how it was pitched to me. This book follows a group of contestants going to an island who are all participating in a kind of bachelor-like show. We're down to the final 4, and they're filming on this island that was cheap for them to film on off the coast of Washington State, and there might be something dangerous waiting for them there. I thought that this was really funny, really satirical, really fast to read. However, I did think that the book was too short. It felt like as soon as the horror elements started picking up, there was a lot of build up, a lot of meeting the characters, and then as soon as things really started happening, it ended. It was almost jarring because it was such a slow build up and then such a lot of action and then it was over. Business or Pleasure, this book by Rachel Lynn Solomon, is all about our main character Chandler, who is a ghostwriter. She finds out that the next D-list celebrity that she is supposed to ghostwrite a memoir for is actually a man with whom she had had a one-night stand, and not a very good one-night stand. Chandler, unfortunately, was not satisfied by their time together. At the time of their one-night stand, she didn't know that he was like semi-famous, but he used to be on a very popular teen show. The way that they describe it, it sounds like Teen Wolf, which is fun because I loved Teen Wolf. And in writing this memoir for him, she goes on tour with him where he's appearing at different fan conventions. They stay in hotels together and she starts to give him pointers on upping his game, so to speak, in the bedroom. It's very steamy, very spicy. I thought the characters were really charming. I especially loved Finn as a love interest, and I liked that they were so open and communicative with one another, especially Finn. I think being told that he is not as skilled as he would like to believe was something that was a blow to his ego at first, but I think that he got over it and was able to have conversations about it very candidly and very maturely. I think that the biggest negative about this book is that as fun as the premise is, as compelling as it seems in theory, I found myself forgetting that I was reading it. I usually take a couple of days to finish a romance novel, but this book, for whatever reason, took me weeks because I would put it down and then just completely forget that it was one of the books that I was reading. When I was reading it, I was enjoying it, but then as soon as I would put it down, it was like completely out of my mind. And maybe it's a me issue, like maybe the story and the characters just weren't sticky for me, but there was something about it that just didn't grab me in the way that I would like to be by romance books. Like I want to be completely invested in the characters getting together, and in this I found myself like not really caring if the characters ended up together in the end, because I thought that they had such a good friendship that even if they didn't end up together romantically, it was fun to read about their bond. So that could be a positive or a negative depending on how deeply, passionately in love you want your main characters in a romance to be, but I thought maybe something worth noting. Okay, I had to change my battery, but we are back to talk about our next book, which is Funny Story. This book is about our main characters, Daphne and Miles, roommates who decide to start fake dating each other after their exes start dating each other. I've talked about this book a few times on this channel and how much I really love it, so I'll try not to go too into depth here again. But my pros are that it has a really heartwarming romance, really funny banter. I always love Emily Henry's like conversation writing skills. I think she's so good at crafting really believable and entertaining dialogue. And I also thought that these were really relatable characters with very believable flaws. As far as cons, Daphne is a children's librarian, and I was really excited about that going into this book because I had heard people saying like, oh, it's so cute that she's a children's librarian. Now, I had previously worked at a public library before I started law school, and my responsibilities at that job were a lot of what Daphne's are in terms of like forming events and doing story times and things like that, and I just wanted more of that. I didn't think that it really talked about her job as much as I wanted it to, and so I was kind of disappointed that that wasn't explored a little bit more, but maybe that's just like a personal thing. And then also there were a few characters, especially Miles's mom, who had a big influence and impact on the story, who we never actually met. These characters that people would like keep talking about, but we never actually saw them on the page, and so it made Miles's emotional experience feel not as fleshed out as Daphne's, and I just wish that we had gotten to meet that character who had such a large impact on the story. But I guess a book can only be so long, and obviously not everything that someone wants to fit in a book can be in it, but I think that that would have been valuable. I think this is my last romance to talk about. This is This Could Be Us by Kennedy Ryan. This book follows our main character Soledad, who is going through a divorce because her husband like really was so awful, both in terms of his faithfulness to her or lack of faithfulness to her, and the fact that he's been like committing white collar crimes. It's just a bad situation all around. So the book is about Soledad moving on from that, helping her daughters to move through the situation as well, and also about her falling in love with a former co-worker of her husband. His name is Judah. He is so swoony. I love him as a love interest and just how like patient and kind he is. As far as negatives, I did find the pacing to be a little bit slow, especially in the middle of the book. It felt like I was reading it for a long time. And then the characters characters were sometimes very frustrating. Like, you know, when you read a book and you're like, just talk to each other. But overall, I did really love the characters regardless of how frustrating they could sometimes be. I Who Have Never Known Men is a very haunting, sad dystopian about a character called the Child. I don't think the narrator is ever actually named, but they live in this underground bunker with a bunch of other women, and the narrator does not have any memory of the outside world because she was put into the bunker when she was so young that she doesn't remember not being in it. And so the book follows this character throughout the entirety of her life, and it is a very sad, harrowing life, I will say. That's one of my biggest cons of the book, is just how unsettling and horrific this book could be. But I also found it to be just so hypnotizing. I was so engrossed in this book as I was reading it, and I found all of the concepts within it to be really thought-provoking, especially when people would be trying to explain things to the child since she had never been in the outside world, like whether or not she could really even conceive of some of these concepts. It was really, really interesting. Now for the fantasies, I read House of Earth and Blood by Sarah J. Maas. I read this for book club with Chloe, and we had so much fun with this. This is an urban fantasy following our main character, Bryce. At the beginning of the book, Bryce's best friend and all of her family are murdered, and so Bryce, throughout the rest of the book, is trying to solve this murder with the help of a fallen angel named Hunt. This is an urban fantasy, which I don't have a lot of experience reading, so it was really fun to be in this very immersive, modern fantasy world. I found it to be very entertaining. Maybe that's just because I'm not used to it, but the fact that the werewolves were texting just cracked me up. I also really liked almost all of the characters. I found myself really, really rooting for Bryce and for Hunt. I loved their banter and their dynamic generally. And although I thought it was a little bit slow in the middle, I appreciated that the book really took the time to build the world. My biggest con is that I felt like some of the plot points towards the end, some of the twists just felt a little bit too convenient, you know, like almost, I don't want to say contrived, but frustratingly too convenient. That being said, I am very, very excited to hopefully read book 2 soon, House of Sky and Breath, because I really enjoyed spending time with the characters, and I'm looking forward to seeing more of them and to seeing where their story goes. I also read Powerless. This book follows Peyton, who is an ordinary in world of elites, which basically means that she does not have a magical ability, whereas all of the elites do have magical abilities, and in this world it is kind of illegal to be an ordinary, and if the kingdom finds out that you are ordinary, then you were killed. So Peyton has been really trying to hide the fact that she's an ordinary. She ends up being invited to participate in these trials. It's like an annual tradition for the king to invite different people to fight against one another and to crown a winner of these trials. If you're asking yourself things like, why does he do that? Or what's the point? What do they win? I don't really know. That's one of my big cons for this book. I felt like the way that the world worked was very confusing to me, but it was very, very fast-paced, very entertaining, and the romantic tension between Kai, the prince slash enforcer, aka the guy who is supposed to be killing the ordinaries, and Peyton, an ordinary, was so good. There was really electric chemistry between the two of them. However, that could sometimes veer into territory that became a little bit cringe, a little bit corny, just in the way that the prince was speaking to and about Peyton. I talked about this a lot in my vlog where I read this book, so I'll link that as well if you want to hear more of my thoughts, but it was just kind of tropey, kind of cliche. So although I did enjoy it overall, there were some parts that were really making me roll my eyes. All right, that is all of the books that I'm going to talk about today in this video. Thank you so much for watching and for spending time with me. I really appreciate you. I hope you have the most lovely day. Don't forget to like and subscribe and click the bell to be notified of the next time I post, and I'll see you in my next video.